Yeah, yeah, the round's starting. I'll call you back. Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Today's question comes to us from the True Stories collection. Amy sits down for her match, but Nick does not show up until about 30 seconds after the round clock has started. What is the appropriate infraction, penalty, and fix? So this is indeed a very common scenario to see at a Magic tournament, and therefore a very important one to be familiar with if you are a judge, especially if you're judging a large-scale Magic event where such scenarios are more common. The infraction that covers this scenario at competitive rel is called tardiness, and even though the policy around this infraction hasn't changed since I released the original version of this video 4 years ago, I still wanted to re-release it because there certainly have been some developments that are relevant to the discussion, as well as to include some relevant information that didn't make it into the first version. So at competitive rel, the normal penalty for tardiness is a game loss. However, in situations where the infracting player is less than 1 minute late, the penalty is downgraded to a warning. I'll give a little bit of history for how this policy came to be. Originally, the penalty was just a game loss, full stop, even if the player was late by just a few seconds. This harsh penalty put judges in a bit of a bind though. The head judge needs to start the round clock sometime, but especially at larger events, it was difficult to know when to do it. After all, you don't know whether everyone who's still standing up or walking around is a player trying to get to a match or a spectator who's just trying to find where his friend is playing, or maybe even someone who's not even playing in the event at all. Eventually, one judge had an idea to instruct the floor judges at an event, okay, if someone is late, we'll have a heart and not assess the game loss if they're less than a minute late. As the idea spread, the phrase tardiness is 0 and 10 with a heart was seen in many head judge emails. There was a problem with this too, though, which is that judges were ruling differently from what the written policy said. In itself, this isn't necessarily a problem. After all, the policy team did not accept the impossible task of writing a set of policy documents that apply sensibly to every conceivable scenario that could happen in a Magic tournament. Therefore, the head judge has the authority to deviate from what the written policy says. The issue, though, is that this is meant to only happen in situations where a clear written policy does not exist, or where significant and exceptional circumstances make the existing written policy a bad fit for what's happened. If judges are routinely and systematically deviating from what the penalty guidelines say, well, that is a problem. The judges were also split on whether they should announce ahead of time that they wouldn't be enforcing this rule the way the policy said. If they did, there was concern that players might take advantage of the judge's laxity, delaying the start of the round. And if they didn't, it looked like favoritism anytime a player who knew what the rules were supposed to be had an opponent not get a game loss. One thing everyone, judges, players, tournament organizers, agreed on was that any of the systems judges were actually using was better than the one that the written policy said to use. And so the policy team changed the text of the policy documents to line up with what everybody wanted the answer to be, which solved the issue. Now, there are still a couple of things that players need to be careful of related to tardiness. First off, like all infractions, the penalty associated with tardiness can be upgraded. In fact, tardiness is classified as a tournament error, which means that the penalty for tardiness is upgraded on the second and all subsequent infractions. This is in contrast to gameplay errors such as looking at extra cards or game rule violations, which are not upgraded until the third instance on a given tournament day. For more information on how penalties upgrade, check out the dedicated video on upgraded penalties linked in the description. Applying that information to the specific point that we're talking about, this means that if you are 59 seconds late for round 1 and 1 second late for round 2, the second instance of tardiness will result in a game loss. The upgrade applies no matter what penalty you got the first time you committed this infraction. So if you were 9 minutes late to round 1 and 1 second late for round 2, you would have a game loss both times. The judges don't save your one freebie if you're extra late on your first offense. The upgrade even applies if you committed the infraction in 2 different ways. Most people only think of tardiness as showing up late to the start of the round, but it actually covers any case where a player takes too long to perform any tournament-related task. The most common other way for this to happen is if a player does not turn in a deck list or a sealed pool registration by the time the head judge announces. Another scenario is if a player loses cards from their deck. If a player finds out that they're missing cards, they are allowed 10 minutes to find them or acquire replacements. Exceeding this limit is also considered tardiness. 10 minutes was chosen as the maximum tolerable delay of a tournament permissible from just one match's disruption. This is significant because in cases where tardiness is assessed, a time extension is given to match so that the players have the same amount of time for the Magic gameplay as all the other matches. Therefore, if a player is more than 10 minutes late to their match, that's the cutoff where the tournament staff will assume you aren't going to show up at all. Judges can tell you that this form of tardiness is the most common, occurring for several players in every major event starting from about round 5 as players who are dead for prize support leave the event hall. If this happens, the player who showed up will be considered to have won the match 2-0, and the other player will be dropped from the event and not paired in future rounds. If you're dropped this way and you actually do want to keep playing, it's possible to talk to the scorekeeper and get added back in. You would have a match loss for the match that you missed, but you would be paired for future rounds. On the other hand, if you know that you are going to leave, I encourage you to manually drop from the event to prevent your opponent from wasting their time waiting for somebody who isn't going to show. In the past, this would have involved going up to the front stage and either talking to the scorekeeper or filling out the paper form. Today, it's right in the companion app, so there really is no excuse. After talking about how it can get upgraded, I feel like I should also talk about a few scenarios where tardiness does not apply. Let's say you suspect that you might be late to the start of a round, generally because you're trying to go to the restroom before the pairings are up. You can talk to a judge and request a delay. As long as the delay is not more than that 10-minute threshold that I mentioned, tardiness does not apply. For multi-judge events, you might want to ask the judge's name before you go in case there's any difficulty when you get back. I always tell people that the best time to go to the restroom or concession stand is right after your match ends, not right before the next one starts. But I understand that it doesn't always end up working out in the ideal way. So another thing that might happen, especially at smaller events, is that all the matches finish early. That is, before the round clock expires. If you're in this situation, it is okay to start the next round early, but the head judge needs to know when the scheduled end time for the previous round was. That's because tardiness does not apply until after this time has passed. This keeps players who leave the venue to get food or something from getting punished by having the round start early when they had no way of knowing about it. Although in reality, this usually only happens at smaller events where many of the players know each other, meaning it's generally possible to get in contact with the player in this sort of situation. Explaining how this works is part of my routine every time I'm judging an RCQ. It's common for players who draw into the top 8 to leave to get food or center themselves. Making sure that everyone is clear on exactly how long that you'll be waiting for them to show back up is a good practice to avoid frustration on everyone's part. Well, up until now, I've been focused on how tardiness works at competitive rel, but it is important at regular rel for all the same reasons. If a player arrives late to their match, we generally do not issue a game loss unless the player is a serious repeat offender. Otherwise, tardiness works pretty much exactly the same. Give a time extension for the length of the tardiness if the player shows up within 10 minutes, drop them from the event if not. The policy is very similar because unlike other types of rule breaking, tardiness as an infraction isn't really about playing fair. It's a practical issue related to the constraints of running a Magic tournament. People are there to play Magic. Waiting around for somebody else is no fun, so the amount of that happening needs to be capped with a clear guide for how long is appropriate. These issues are no less of a concern at regular rel, so the policy is therefore similar. But that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another daily ruling. Until then, I hope you have a great day.